Hi, everybody. This is lecture one in a series of short lectures on the Trivium. That is, the first three of the classical liberal arts grammar, rhetoric, and logic. We will explore these across the whole series. Our business today is just to talk about the liberal arts. What are the liberal arts? What is this Trivium? And why would we study it? Let's answer those questions. On our title slide here, we have an image, a medieval image, of the seven classical liberal arts. Now, when we hear the term liberal arts today, we might have all kinds of associations with that from our contemporary culture. For much of history, though, the liberal arts were precisely seven fields. The student would study these fields not only to become adept in these arts, but to be transformed as a person. The liberal arts pertained to character and pertained to a person's identity as well. It was a way of actualizing their potential, as we will see presently. This is what I want to propose as the watchword for these lectures, something that you can keep in mind throughout this series. The liberal arts are the arts that liberate. The liberal arts are the arts that liberate you, again, to actualize your potential. Now, that has a kind of self help connotation in our present day, and that's not entirely misplaced. But when I say actualize your potential, I have in mind a more classical meaning. For Aristotle, everything has a certain potential. We learn this in earth science, right? There's a potential energy in any object. In order to become fully who you are, let's use that language, you need to actualize that potential. A person who has actualized her potential is a flourishing person, right? What does it mean to live a flourishing life? It means to actualize your potential. And this pertains to liberation, as we have here on the slide, or to freedom. And I want to say just a bit about freedom, or as I have on the slide here, liberty. Because what is liberty? We can make a distinction between two kinds of liberty based on an essay by the philosopher Isaiah Berlin, Two Concepts of Liberty. In that essay, Berlin distinguishes between what he calls negative liberty and positive liberty. Negative liberty is freedom from something, freedom from coercion, right? There is no obstacle in your way as you try to engage in some activity or to speak, right? So, freedom of speech as the ability to speak freely would mean that you have that negative liberty, right? Nothing is obstructing you. Positive liberty has to do with the capacity to do something, right? To take an example, I do not play the piano, as it so happens. I've been told I have the fingers for it. I probably should have learned to play the piano because I'd like to, but I never did. When I sit down at a piano, I do not have the positive liberty to play that piano. I have not been trained or formed in a way that enables me to read from the sheet music and translate it onto the keys, right? I'm perfectly at liberty to play it from this negative liberty point of view, right? Nothing is preventing me from doing it. My hands are on the keys, but I don't have the positive liberty to do it. What I want to propose is that the seven classical liberal arts pertain to this positive liberty, right? They're about enabling us to do things that we have the potential to do, right? But we need, again, to actualize that potential. So, in this way, you can flourish, you can become more fully who you can be. And that's, again, what these liberal arts are doing. So, what are these seven liberal arts? We've mentioned already the Trivium, which is, of course, the title of this series. Trivium, via means ways, right? A vium means a way. So, Trivium is the collection of three ways or three paths of formation or learning. Those are grammar, rhetoric, and logic. Now, they're not placed in that order randomly. You build up from one to the next, right? So you start with grammar. What are you doing in grammar? You're learning about symbols, how to put letters together into words, how to put words together into sentences. This is an entry level skill, right? If I say Matt Cat on is the, That doesn't make any sense. The syntax is wrong. The words are in the wrong order. If I say, the cat is on the mat, the syntax is right. I am conveying a meaning to you. Grammar is just a way of training the writer or speaker to speak or write in such a way that others can understand her. Rhetoric is a step beyond that. Okay, so I say the cat is on the mat. Very nice. I've conveyed some information, but I haven't really compelled maybe or inspired you, right? As a speaker, we want not only to convey information, but we want to engage an audience. We want the audience to see what we're saying and to accept it, right? And there are lots of different approaches to this. We're going to look at some of them in the course. That's a second order kind of ability, and thus the second of the 7 liberal arts. Third is logic, and logic is, fun fact, actually a part of rhetoric as well, right? It's some strategy that you might use in a speech to compel your audience, but it's also, since Aristotle, a standalone discipline. We might engage in logic outside of the context of any speech, right? We might simply think in order to deduce or derive new information from the evidence we have before us or from other things that we happen to know. This is a third order skill, right? We're building on, okay, we can make a sentence, we can speak the sentence in a compelling way, but now we want to actually discover the truth. We want to learn what is true by reflecting on what we already know. Now, once you have those 3 arts in place, you are adept at these 3 things, you're able to go on to other things. The trivium is, we talk about like a trivia night at bar, right? At a bar, or the game Trivial Pursuit. This word trivia refers to like simple facts that you need to know before you can go on to other things, or just kind of unimportant details in our current usage. This is because the trivia, the trivium, were the arts you needed to learn before the quadrivium, which is our second group of the 7 liberal arts. There are 4 of them. Again, these 4 ways are not randomly placed. They begin with arithmetic, right? This is an engagement with, as I have on the slide here, discrete quantity or number. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? Multiplication, subtraction, division. I'm working with numbers. Numbers are discrete quantities in the sense that they just stand alone. Number, 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 right? And I can put those in order to discover new knowledge, kind of like I did in logic. Music follows arithmetic. Now, that might seem like a random inclusion, but think about the theory of music. What you're doing there is working with discrete tones, right? So you have various notes. They have a pitch, a duration, right? And that pitch and duration differentiates them, and then you place those in order in a certain way according to principles of music theory, and create something that is harmonious and beautiful. Again, you're working here with discrete quantities, but now you're putting them together in a way that harmonizes. This continues in geometry and astronomy, the last of the 7 liberal arts, but here you're not working with number, 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 discrete things. You're working with continuous quantities, curves, orbits, as in astronomy, moving things, right? So geometry trains you in how to work with those in an abstract way, but then astronomy enables you to understand the harmonious relationships among those things. So there is a logic, as it were, to these 7 liberal arts, and they, again, all go together in a way to form the student. Now, an image that I really like is this one. It's from the 15th century, so just the kind of beginning of the Renaissance. Here we see that the 7 liberal arts, you probably can't see it on the slide, are aligned with 7 virtues of the classical world, the 7 most important virtues. You start with the 3 virtues of faith, hope, and love. And these are what are called the theological virtues. They're understood within the Christian tradition as something that is received as a gift. Virtue in general, remember, means a good habit, something that enables you to flourish. And in this way, it is similar to the 7 liberal arts. These are joined by the 4 cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. And all 7 of these, the theological and cardinal virtues, are lined up with the 7 liberal arts: logic, rhetoric, grammar, arithmetic, music, geometry, and astronomy. Now, I don't know if it's exactly a one-to-one correspondence, but the idea is just as the 7 liberal arts have a certain unity about them and together produce a kind of integrated, developed person, right? So too is there a unity among the virtues? And there's an interesting debate about that historically, whether you can have just one of the virtues, or if you have one, you have all of them. In both cases, though, we see that what we would call today ethics, right, or morality, character, is implicated in both of these areas. And the liberal arts aren't just about technical skills, but they're about who you are. We see that emphasized in another way I'd like to frame the liberal arts. Let's put up a couple other areas of arts here: the practical arts and the fine arts. Right? So the practical arts include everything from carpentry and plumbing to business, law, and banking. Right? These are practical, we would say today, skills. Right? You need to work with something outside of yourself. You need to become skilled at it, adept at it, and able to produce a certain outcome, practically speaking, right? We learn this in college. It's very important. This is paralleled in some way by the fine arts, where, again, you're working with material outside yourself. You need to know that material. If you're a carpenter, you need to know about the wood you're working with. If you're a painter, you need to understand the chemistry of the paint that you're working with, right? And how it will interact with other media in your composition. The liberal arts are classically understood as distinct from these two, right? The liberal arts include what we would today call the arts and humanities, right? These are the useless disciplines. You're not so much learning skills to work with something outside of yourself, you're doing something different. What are you doing? We can understand the difference between these two by introducing a distinction between the transitive arts and the intransitive arts, right? So transitive means transition, right? There's an action on my part, and I apply that action to an object, right? So there's a transit from my action to the object. The practical arts and the fine arts focus on that. I need to become skilled at that. The liberal arts are intransitive arts, right? So whereas in the case of the practical and fine arts, I might say, oh, okay, I plane the wood, right? I'm a carpenter. There's wood, it's an object. I'm engaged in an action of planing it. Right? In the case of the intransitive arts, the liberal arts, it's more like a rose blooms, right? The rose doesn't bloom something. There's no object. The rose itself blooms. You're transforming the actor, the agent, the subject herself, right? You're not focused on interaction with something outside of yourself. And again, that is what the liberal arts aims to do, to help us actualize our potential. A couple alternative framings here. Here we have grammar, rhetoric, and logic. This image aligns them with knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, and joins them together in the center under what is called true learning or mastery, right? So classically speaking, once you know these 3 liberal arts, the first 3, the trivium, you have mastered, right, the basic skills you need to go on to the quadrivium and to other fields of study. In this one, the order of the 3 is modified. We go from grammar to logic to rhetoric, and that is sometimes done. But this presents it as the learning of facts and rules, and then the learning of relations between those facts, and then finally the engagement in criticism and persuasion. There's an interesting debate historically about the relation between rhetoric and logic. A figure like Isocrates, not Socrates, but Isocrates, in the classical Greek world, was a master rhetorician and upheld the primacy of rhetoric, whereas Socrates, kind of founder of Western philosophy, upheld logic and what he called dialectic, or what we might call critical thinking, as the primary as the primary activity of a rational mind. Let's talk a bit about logic, since much of this course is going to deal with logic. From around 400 BC, when Aristotle was living, until 1900, like the 20th century, the study of logic mostly meant the study of Aristotle. Right? Aristotle had laid out logic. He established, or as we'll see later, invented formal logic, done as something that you can be taught and something you can study. And for centuries, and this as in other fields, Aristotle was the philosopher. He was the guy that you go to, the standard of thought. In the 1910s, however, Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead published their book, Principia Mathematica, in 3 volumes during the decade of the 1910s. And this absolutely revolutionized how logic is done. No longer were you working with what we call ordinary language, sentences and propositions stated in English, say, as we're using in this lecture. You were dealing with symbols. And in this image taken from the Principia Mathematica, you can begin to appreciate the complexity and even the strangeness of this new mathematical language. Logic came to be understood as indeed a branch of mathematics, and the work of Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead contributed importantly to the development of computer technology and big changes in how we think about and teach logic. We will not, in this course, be looking at symbolic logic in this modern form. We're going to be focused on, again, the arts of the trivium, the classical liberal arts, and we'll be looking at the logic primarily of Aristotle. That being said, I want to just kind of locate what we're going to be doing in this series on this very helpful chart taken from Google Images. Thank you very much. We have at the top here logic, and then we engage in something we'll discuss later, the division of terms, right? You start with logic. Okay, there are 2 different kinds of logic, informal logic and formal logic. Right? And then under formal logic, there are similarly 2 different kinds of formal logic, deductive and inductive. Now we can locate what we're going to do in this series right here. We're engaged in a kind of logic that's not modern symbolic logic, right? So we're looking at Aristotle, traditional Aristotelian logic, including things like the categorical syllogism, but we're also looking at informal logic, at how to define things, the classification of things, recognizing and diagramming arguments. Also in this course, we'll be looking at logical fallacies. And this is something that gets a lot of attention in courses on critical reasoning and logic. There are 2 different kinds of fallacies, helpfully distinguished on this slide, informal and formal. So informal fallacies relate to content, like maybe the meaning of a term is not entirely clear, whereas formal fallacies relate to form. There is some kind of error in your thinking, right? As you move from premise 1, premise 2 to the conclusion, something goes amiss, right? What we're going to do in this course is focus on formal fallacies, that is, fallacies pertaining to the structure or the form of arguments. We're going to try and learn to find those arguments in things that we see and read, and identify exactly why they are in error. So just a few more slides here on what this series is going to cover. We're starting in lecture 2 with grammar and syntax. So again, that concerns the order of words, what words are. We're going to be focusing, of course, on English language. And then we'll move on to rhetoric, right? And rhetoric, again, is about the compelling composition of language in such a way as to move a particular audience. From there, the bulk of the lectures from 5 till 20 are going to deal with logic, right? And we're going to move through 3 areas following the presentation of the author Hauser in his book Logic as a Liberal Art, and I will link to that book in the description of this video. We'll focus first on the logic of terms, that is identifying specific terms and words that are used in an argument. We'll move on to the logic of propositions, so distinguishing between just a sentence and what proposition is being made in that sentence. I have here, so what you're saying is, the idea being something like, I say something, but there might be an implication, right? There might be a claim contained in my words that I'm not stating directly, but I can still identify. And we're going to look for those propositions in sentences. And finally, we'll look at the logic of arguments, where we combine propositions in such a way as to derive from them new knowledge, things we did not know before. All three of these things, again, are arts that we can learn. These lectures are just a very beginning point on that, but practicing these skills on your own is going to be a way to sharpen your ability to engage effectively with the world and actualize your potential, because that's what we keep coming back to. Just briefly, I want to identify what we mean by proposition, and then we'll look at a couple quick examples of arguments. So you'll see the kind of arguments that we'll be working with later in the course. The first slide here lists various types of sentence, right? So we have 5 is a prime number. We have did you lock the door? Moving down, we have Jane Austen is the author of Pride and Prejudice, right? On the side, on the right, we see that each of these is a different kind of sentence, but only 3 of them are in fact propositions, right? 5 is a prime number, 8 is an odd number, and Jane Austen is the author of Pride and Prejudice. Now, whether or not these are true, because we can see that 8 is an odd number is in fact not true, it is nonetheless a proposition, in this case a false proposition. It is making a claim. It is predicating something of the subject, right? It is saying 8 is an odd number. Now that can either be true or false. Right? In this case, it is false. Other sentences that we can say, like, did you lock the door, happy birthday, please pass the salt, are not propositions. They're not making a claim. She walks to school is itself not a proposition, but she is walking to school, or she walks to school every day. There could be a proposition contained in that, but as stated, the sentence is not yet a proposition. The last slide here, I just want to take a look at a couple arguments. These are what are called syllogisms, and we're going to be building up to this throughout the course. Some syllogisms are valid and some are invalid. Some are sound and some are unsound. We're going to talk about validity and soundness. But just take a look at the first of these, which is framed as being both valid and believable. Right? All flowers need light. Roses are flowers. Roses need light. All right, so this has 2 premises. All flowers need light, roses are flowers, and it has a conclusion. Roses need light. Now, if I only knew in the world those 2 premises, the first 2, all flowers need light, roses are flowers, if that's all the information I had about the world, I would not yet know that roses need light, right? Now, in this case, I am provided with new information in the conclusion. Now, this is the kind of argument that often we'll just do in our head, right? This is not something that you need formal logic to do. We're using a simple example intentionally, but it's instructive because it exposes how intuitively we might think about things, and we can sharpen and improve our intuitions, our logical intuitions, by looking at it in this formal way. That's what we're going to be doing in the series. And finally here, an example of an argument that is invalid and unbelievable. All mammals can walk. Spiders can walk. Spiders are mammals. Okay, spiders are not mammals. We happen to know that from other sources, right? So we have here an untrue conclusion. How do we get to that, right? What we're going to be doing later in the course is mapping out not just kind of is it true or is it not in general, but precisely where does it go wrong? Where does the argument go wrong? And how could you change the argument to bring off a true conclusion based on those premises? That does it for Lecture 1. The liberal arts are the arts that liberate. They liberate you to actualize your potential and to more effectively accomplish your purposes in the world and engage with reality. I look forward to continuing our discussion in this series.